I squeezed the kitchen knife in my right hand and grimaced. The letters rearranged themselves. Cut off a finger. Adrenaline shot through my spine, and I considered my options. I pictured myself with no pinky. My grandfather did terrible, cruel things in life. Now that he's dead, I finally understand why. He was stuck in a mental institution, as determined by law, for my entire life. I was never allowed to visit him. Thus, I never really knew him as a person. I only ever heard the stories. Randomly attacking people, breaking objects, being a nuisance to society. What sent him away for good was when he ran over 13 people with his car. Most of them died. They think it was a significant cognitive illness, onset by years of CTE from being in the military. I know better. I was given his watch at his funeral. I don't exactly know why my dad gave it to me. Guess he thought it would be a kind gesture. Its weight was light in my hand, cheap. A simple automatic silver watch with beaten leather straps. It had something etched onto the back, a sigil, like in possession movies. 2 intersecting triangles, like a Star of David, with the top pointing triangle corner replaced with a square. It was all surrounded with a circle, permanently entrenched upon the metal backing. Although I wasn't much of a watch guy, I wore it for the next few days after that. It felt nice having something with history with me at all times. One morning when I woke up and checked the time, something changed. As I sat there, the tiny lines making up the numbers around the edges of the face began to move. I brought the watch close to my tired eyes. They moved quickly, reorganizing into the center of the watch to form words. Hold your breath. I was baffled. I thought I must have been dreaming. I didn't hold my breath. I just sat there and stared, dumbfounded. Suddenly, a sharp pain radiated through my wrist. It felt like I was being poked with a bunch of needles. I winced and gripped the area with my other hand. It only lasted for a few seconds. When I looked back at the watch, it had gone back to normal. My wrist still sore. I attempted to remove the watch. The straps came undone easily enough, but the watch case didn't. As I lifted it, the skin underneath pulled with it painfully. It looked like my skin had been superglued to the back. After exhausting all options I could think of for removing it, I gave up and just left it on. I had to get to class. At the end of my first class of the day, right when the professor excused everybody, I felt a faint buzz on my wrist. I looked down. The letters rearranged themselves. Trip the next person in the aisle. I laughed out loud at the absurdity of it. Trip someone? I glanced up at the students beginning to stand up and walk down the aisle. The first person was about to pass me as I sat at the end of the row. I contemplated actually doing it for a second, but my foot hesitated. They walked past me uninterrupted. I heard a quiet click and a short grind coming from my watch. Before I was able to look down, an intense stinging pain shot up my forearm from the wrist. My jaw clenched and I tried to look normal. By the time the pain stopped, after about 15 seconds, the skin around my wrist had gone pale. Looking closer, I could now see a few faint, dark lines spurting out under my skin from the watch case. I quickly left the room. During my second class of the day, sitting in a giant lecture hall, listening to a professor drone on about calculus, I felt another buzz. I looked down. Steal her wallet. I turned to my right. A girl was sitting next to me, her face down, presumably asleep. Her wallet was sitting right there on the desk. Imagining the intense pain under my watch, my right hand started to twitch. I needed to get that wallet. Consequences be damned. It wasn't that bad, right? Just as I was an inch away from touching it, she jerked awake. My hand reeled back instinctually. Damn it, if I could just... My thought was interrupted by the rapid firing of every single nerve in my wrist and hand. It was so shockingly bad that I couldn't contain a pained groan from escaping my lips. My skin felt like it was being flayed and the bone underneath being crushed into dust. I gripped the edge of my desk for support as I rocked through the waves of misery. It didn't stop for several minutes this time. A slick sweat had formed on my forehead by then. Inspecting the watch, I found that the skin around the leather straps had grown up around the edges, or maybe the leather was sinking into the skin. It was hard to tell, but tightly tugging on the band revealed that it was completely fused to me. My mind raced. If I could just get somewhere private. The time on the watch told me that I wasn't even halfway through the lecture yet. I tried to just sit there and focus on the class material. I hoped it would end quickly. Right before the end of the class period, the buzz came again. My stomach dropped. Stab her. I realized then I was gripping a sharpened pencil in my right hand, tightly. The girl next to me had her left hand laying flat on the desk. My heart began to pound. No time for rationalizing. I couldn't go on like this. My hand shook in anticipation as I mentally prepared myself for a quick exit from the room. I raised my hand. The pencil swung down in a flash, crossing through the soft flesh of the girl's hand like butter. It jammed into the wood underneath. A violent shriek and a trickle of blood onto my hand told me I needed to go. I grabbed my bag and ran out of the room. I made it to my house soon after. In all the rush, I didn't ever notice any pain in my wrist. Visually, it looked no different than it had before the gruesome task. A sickly wave of relief washed over me. In hindsight, I realized that this wasn't the right move, but that evening, after hours of nothing from the watch, I felt safer. I began to prepare dinner, which involved cutting up a tomato while water sat in a pot on the stove. I shuddered and missed the trajectory of my slice when a new buzz made me jump. I squeezed the kitchen knife in my right hand and grimaced as I looked to the watch face. Cut off a finger. Adrenaline shot through my spine, and I considered my options. As much as I didn't want to do it, I imagined the possible consequences. I pictured myself with no pinky. No way. That's not a fair trade. I stabbed the knife into the cutting board. I figured losing a finger was worse than the watch getting even more stuck than it already was. I braced. Molten metal soaked through my skin and into my veins. Everything burned a white, hot pain, worse than anything I had ever felt before. I collapsed to the ground in agony and began to weep. The silver metal of the watch was spreading across my skin, growing and rooting itself, becoming a part of my arm. Mechanical groans and clicks and whirs rang in my ears. My screaming alerted my roommate. He ran out into the kitchen to see what was wrong. He found me curled up on the tile floor, crying and gripping my wrist. I told him to get out, but he wouldn't listen. After a half hour, the pain gradually subsided, but he refused to leave my side, not wanting to leave me alone since I wouldn't let him call an ambulance. I could tell that the sight of my arm left him terrified. Bzzz. My teeth would have shattered if I clenched my jaw any tighter when I felt it. I glanced at my spasming mechanical arm. Throw boiling water at him. I had no qualms about it. I couldn't think of a better solution. I wouldn't let this progress any further. I threw my roommate's arm off my shoulder, and I rose to my feet without a word. I walked to the large pot of water, now boiling violently. With no hesitation, I gripped one of the handles with my right hand and flung it at him haphazardly. The water flew across the room in a steaming arch, reaching him before he could move. The boiling water splashed across his face, chest, arms, everything. Soaking into his clothes, he shrieked in a way that shook me to my core. A cloud of steam formed around him as his skin turned red, then darker, then it began to fizzle and pop and crack. The air reeked of burnt meat and hair. Visions of my grandfather crossed my mind. The stories, the 13 people, the girl's hand, the man sprawled out on the floor in front of me. How many more people? I knew then that it would be until I died. I'd be just like my grandfather. I looked down as my wrist buzzed once again. Kill him. No. I turned around and raced to the cutting board. I shoved a dish towel into my mouth. I grabbed the kitchen knife with my knuckles white. I threw my heavy mechanical arm onto the board, slamming with immense weight. I followed the metal to its end, right about halfway up my forearm. Before I could stop myself, I thrust the knife into the soft, pale flesh. It sunk in easily, the pain less intense than that of the watch. Blood quickly began to flood from the growing wound as I sawed away. I struggled to break through the bone, hard and slippery in the bleeding mess. Pressing all my weight into it, I heard two sick, wet snapping sounds. My head grew dizzy. The world spun. Eventually, the last bit of flesh separated under the blade, and I heard the familiar chop of the knife against the board. I backed away from the counter, and my left arm didn't follow. The part metal, part flesh contraption laid dead in a pool of blood. I took all the dish towels in the room and tightened them over my bleeding stump. I tripped over my roommate's charred, barely breathing body as I ran to the phone. I'm writing this out from a hospital bed. It's been a couple of days. I'm stable now. I think they're going to have psych people coming in to see me soon, so I'm preparing my story. Whether or not they believe it, I know the truth about my grandfather. Don't repeat the same mistakes that your family's made. It's not worth it. My organs are itchy. It was getting to the point where it's affecting my quality of life. I wasn't sure exactly where the source was, but I suddenly felt it deep inside of my torso. I remember I was clocking off of work when it started. A slight discomfort back then, a relief compared to what was awaiting. While keeping my eyes on the road, I moved my torso side to side to try to relieve myself, which fortunately worked. When I arrived home, I felt more exhausted than usual and went to bed early. The next day, the itch came again, stronger but bearable. The lingering feeling was on the back of my mind, and in between busy moments of work, I would twist and turn, trying to get rid of that itch. Despite my efforts, it stayed persistent. When I got home that night, I had trouble sleeping. Closing my eyes seemed to amplify the feeling. I don't remember when I drifted off. On the third day, it became so bad, I felt chills running down my legs. The moment I woke up, I found myself twitching erratically into strange positions to try and get rid of the itch. I even tried pinching, grabbing my skin in handfuls and stretching it around, and punching and slapping myself. Weirdly, I swore I felt something move, but no matter what I did, it just wouldn't go away. I decided I needed to go to the doctor to check this out. I called in sick to work and called my family doctor, who agreed this was a peculiar situation. After asking me a series of further questions, in which the entire time I was bouncing on my feet, she told me to schedule in for an ultrasound. The appointment was going to be late at night. I wanted to schedule the appointment as soon as possible, and it was the earliest time. I'll take what I can get. Trying my best to ignore it and move on with my day, I made myself some breakfast. My brain protested, screaming for itch relief, but there was nothing I could do. It's not like I could grab a knife to cut myself open and scratch my insides or something. Along with that thought, I eyed the drawer the knives were in. I shook my head at myself. I wasn't that crazy. I just needed to endure a few more hours. After waiting through an excruciating afternoon, it was finally time to leave. I grabbed the keys and bolted out of the door, no longer able to sit still. When I arrived at the hospital, I was greeted by a doctor who led me to a room where I was to be changed into a gown, and then into the ultrasound room. The doctor rolled up my gown using a towel to cover my groin and put the cool device down onto my body. I could feel the gel spreading as she pressed towards the area of interest, which I informed her of moments before. She moved the device back and forth around the area, and then suddenly went still. "What's wrong?" I asked. I lifted my head to look at her. Her eyes were wide, eyebrows knitted together. Her expression was a mix of fear and confusion, probably the last thing I wanted to see in this situation. Did I have some disease? Was there something wrong with my body? She turned the ultrasound screen towards me. At first, I couldn't make out anything but a giant shifting blob, but upon closer inspection, I could see the legs. Thousands, no, millions of them. Spiders, tiny baby spiders, overran my liver, crawling fast on top of each other, entirely covering my liver in a dark mass. To top it all, in the center was the biggest spider of all, splayed on top of the baby spiders, with a size comparable to a large tarantula. I could no longer pull myself together. I was so itchy. I started thrashing and writhing on my bed. The doctor yelled something and other doctors came rushing in. I begged them to do something. Anything. After they assessed me and the ultrasound, they put me to sleep. I woke up in a hospital bed, still groggy from the anesthesia. I looked around for a doctor while I tried to recall my memories. That's right, they operated on me while I was asleep. I no longer felt the itch. I've never been so grateful to be itch-free in my life, thinking I've been taking everyday life for granted. A doctor came in and checked on my condition before informing me about what happened. He said he had never seen an anomaly like this in his life. I would be surprised if he had. 1,074 spiders. That's how many were removed from me. The number sent chills down my spine. The doctor must have read my unsettled expression and assured me I was going to be all right. I thanked him for his hard work. I was discharged a few days later. Going back to my normal life wasn't as easy. Though I was fine physically, I didn't recover mentally. How could this anomaly even be possible? And why me? Eventually, I went back to work and tried to forget about the experience, burying it deep where I would never think of it again. Until today. It's only been 2 weeks since I returned home, and when I woke up this morning, I felt a familiar sensation, a slight itch. I think the fear I tried so hard to push away is coming true. A fear that maybe during the operation, there was a slight possibility, that they missed one. My fiancé went missing 6 months ago, and everyone's convinced I killed her. Last night, my doorbell camera caught her standing across the street, staring at our house from the edge of the cornfield. When Rose vanished, Detective Hughes seemed damn certain he'd discover where I buried her body. I told him I had nothing to do with it, over and over. I explained that he was squandering precious time. I begged him to consider other possibilities, pleaded for him to expand the search. You know what I got in response? A crap-eating grin, and some old-timey, "You're going away for a long time, pal," cop speak. The smugness of it all made me want to bash my head against the cell wall until my skull collapsed. Can't say I was surprised though. Some small part of myself knew I was screwed from the jump. Rose had no enemies. I had no alibi. Of course he thought I killed her. What other explanation would there be? We were home that day, just the two of us. Rose went outside to stick a for sale sign in the roadside, even though I told her it was a waste of energy. I'd lived in that house my entire life, inherited from my parents when they passed. Labeling it secluded was a generous understatement. If someone ever drove by, it was because they were very, very lost, and probably not in the market for a beat-up farmhouse. Still, she was insistent. A sale would have financed the wedding Rose always envisioned for us. So damn it, she was going to figure out a way to sell it. And that meant trying everything, including the sign. Rose was stubborn like that. Fiercely, unapologetically, bullheaded. Always had been. During the winter of '96, her family's golden retriever ran out onto a frozen lake and fell through the ice. Her mom screamed for her to stay put, but the command didn't even slow her down. She dove headfirst into the water. Rose couldn't save the drowning dog, of course. I mean, what are the odds any 8-year-old could have? That wasn't the point though. If she wanted to do something, she'd do everything in her power to make it manifest. No matter what anyone said, no matter the cost. In that case, the cost was pretty steep. 8 days in the hospital, $30,000 in medical expenses, and a trio of amputated toes. Frostbite had devoured the smallest 3 on her right foot, left each of them dust-colored and brittle, like an eggshell. You'd think losing some digits would have dented her natural resolve. Her ability to walk was never the same, but she wobbled, with her chest puffed out, emerald eyes gleaming with this inextinguishable fire. Her expression steadfast and sure, even when the kids at school mocked her, nicknaming her Two-Toed Rose. Naturally, I didn't bother to fight her on the for sale sign. Instead, I grabbed a beer from the fridge, slumped onto the couch, and tried to unwind. "Be right back," she called out. 15 minutes later, my stomach was warm with lager. She hadn't come back in. I wasn't worried. What was there to be worried about? I would have heard if there was some trouble. The only ambient noise, this deep into the heartland, was the wind whistling softly between the corn stalks. My head began to feel pleasantly heavy. I let my eyelids flutter and fall. Woke up with a start, lurching upright, caked in cold sweat and gasping for air. Hours had passed. The night-swept house curled around me, grimly silent. I called out to her, but to no avail. Rose wasn't inside. My truck was still in the driveway. I ended up skipping the worried phase and proceeded straight to borderline hysterical. I bolted up and down the road, screaming her name. Then I called Dan. To my profound relief, he answered his cell on the first ring. Lord only knows how someone born in our sad excuse for a shed ended up becoming the assistant to Minnesota's district attorney. But in that moment, I was grateful. My older brother pulled some strings, and within hours, droves of policemen were buzzing around my farmhouse. I sat on the porch and let them work, head in my hands, out of my mind with anxiety. Sniffer dogs had no difficulty picking up her scent, but as soon as they entered the cornfield across the street, the pack of German shepherds turned rabid, barking, whining, spinning in manic circles, biting wildly at each other. Detective Hughes told me that their abrupt frenzy indicated that the scent trail had gone cold, and that it was a normal, expected reaction. The confusion painted across their handler's face seemed to suggest otherwise. A day later, I was arrested and charged with Rose's murder. The police raised that cornfield, unearthing every speck of dirt in a half-mile radius, searching for Rose's corpse, but found nothing. No blood, no body, no for sale sign, nothing, other than the testimony of a few malfunctioning sniffer dogs. There was no objective evidence that I'd killed her, so the case never went anywhere, and they eventually had to let me go. In the trial of public opinion, however, I was guilty by default. When someone's wife disappears, it's always the husband's doing. Isn't that right, Frank? That is what Rose's father screamed at me when I dared to show my face at the local grocery store. In the wake of her disappearance, everyone seemed to gloss over the fact that Rose and I never had the wedding, an honorary promotion to husband and wife, excruciating and ironic in equal measure. The man chased me all the way to my truck, angry tears spilling down his unshaved cheeks, white-knuckled fists hammering the driver's side window, splintering the glass while my trembling hand fumbled to shove the key into the ignition. "Where the hell is my daughter, you sick SOB?" he bellowed as I sped away. I didn't have the answer, but he believed I did, and that was my true cross to bear. I was just as desperate to know what happened to Rose as anyone else, but I had no community to fall back on. The only person that stood by me was Dan, though I could never tell if that was because he actually believed I was innocent or if he was trying to save face, maintaining appearances to sidestep the bad PR of being related to a killer. I trained myself not to think about it. After the incident with Rose's father, Dan offered to deliver food and booze to the farmhouse every Saturday, on the condition that I kept a low profile. That was fine by me, as long as the rations kept coming. Dan could believe whatever he wanted. The days were long and miserable, but the nights were worse. I couldn't sleep. My mind was foggy in the daylight, but as soon as the sun set, it would go into overdrive. I found myself haunted by the same 3 impossible questions, night after night after night. Where was Rose? Who took her? Were they outside right now, lurking in the cornfield, preparing to take me too? If I was ever going to sleep again, I needed some sort of protection, but Dan refused to bankroll a security system for the house. I'm already splitting the cost for these deliveries. Sure as hell not going to fork over another $1,000 for cameras on that godforsaken house. His reluctant counteroffer was for me to move in with him and his family. Told him that wasn't going to happen. I can't just leave. If Rose ever comes home, I need to be there, I claimed, though if I'm being honest, I held no hope of her returning home. Still, I wouldn't leave. Leaving that house felt akin to a confession. I refused to give anyone the satisfaction. In the end, the doorbell camera was our compromise. I could afford a cheap one, with basic motion detection capabilities. I had it mailed to Dan's house, and he brought it with the next delivery. 6 months passed, never got a single notification. Not until this morning. I woke up around noon, more hungover than usual. I rolled off the couch, gripping my head, acid slithering up the back of my throat. The air in the dimly lit foyer was hot and putrid. I gagged, stumbled around, ankles knocking into empty bottles, causing them to roll. The clinking of glass colliding with glass aggravated my already pounding headache. I wobbled down the front hallway. Sunlight would be torture, but I was willing to endure it for fresh air. I slammed my eyes shut, twisted the knob, and staggered onto the porch, breathing deep. Then, there was an unexpected crunch beneath my bare foot, followed by a visceral squish. I lifted my foot and forced myself to look, grimacing as the daylight needled my throbbing eyes. The remains of a large brown moth lay smeared across the hardwood. Although I had crushed it, I was fairly sure I hadn't killed it. A handful of identical moths were scattered across my porch, and all of them looked to be dead. I surveyed the yard. There weren't any other dead moths lying in the grass or baking on the asphalt. I shrugged, planting myself on a nearby chair so I could pluck the sticky debris out of my skin. That's when I noticed something bizarre. I counted at least 20 tiny legs splattered across my heel. Moths don't have that many legs, do they? My pocket buzzed. I scraped the last bits of insect off my skin and pulled my phone from my sweatpants. Sparks flew up and down my spine as I stared at the notifications lingering on screen. Motion alert, 3:28 a.m. Motion alert, 3:44 a.m. I watched those recordings with wide, unblinking eyes, and for the first time since Rose vanished, my mind felt clear. I knew what to do next. Dan, this is the last favor, I promise. Static hissed over the spotty connection. I sat on the porch, monitoring the cornfield, scrutinizing each individual stalk with a feverish intensity. You need to get Detective Hughes over to the farmhouse ASAP. She's still here. I saw her. Black clouds congregated on the horizon, pretending a deluge. Motion alerts. March 25th, early morning. Kitson County, Minnesota. 3:28 a.m. A silhouette pops into view on the other side of the pothole-ridden street. There's no footage of them walking into frame. No video evidence of them emerging from the vast cornfield on the opposite side of the street. They just appear. Their stance is stilted and awkward. Head forward, legs apart, stretched arms held down at an angle, palms facing the camera. They remain motionless for 16 minutes. Their stillness is so perfect that the recording appears frozen. Details about the silhouette, what they're wearing, their facial features, the presence of any injuries, are hard to discern because of their distance from the camera. 3:44 a.m. A moth lands on the lens, obscuring the cornfield and the silhouette with its wings. After a few seconds, the moth listlessly falls from the lens, and the cornfield returns to view. The silhouette is gone. Not only that, but the location where it had been standing is different. Some of the nearby stalks have vanished. Others are missing only pieces, severed cleanly from the stalks at bizarre angles. There, she's right there. I bent over the detective's shoulder and jabbed the top left corner of my laptop, pixels distorting as my fingernail dug into the screen. Detective Hughes leaned over the kitchen table, squinting, cocking his head, studying her. Outside, rain pelted the gutters. My anxious heartbeat sort of mimicked the downpour. Quick, rhythmic bursts of sound and motion. Why was he being so quiet? I know the feed is hazy, I paused, unsure of what I was going to say next. But that's definitely Rose. I don't know why she's standing like that. Don't know why she never came inside last night. But she's alive. Rose is alive. The thud of my laptop slamming shut severed my stream of consciousness. Detective Hughes stood, pulled his raincoat from the rim of the chair, and began sliding it on. So did you email it to yourself, or... He paced out of the kitchen, stepping over empty beer bottles and plates of rotting food, navigating the minefield of detritus that acted as a physical testament to Rose's prolonged absence. Wait, you're reopening her case, right? I called after him. I followed him into the foyer. The man was practically sprinting out of my house as his hand gripped the front doorknob. He spat a few harsh syllables under his breath. I felt heat gnawing at my ribs. What the hell did you just say? I shouted. Hughes tensed his shoulders. He released the knob and slowly turned to face me. His bloodshot eyes were bulging. A bright blue vein pulsed beneath the skin of his temple. I said, this is the last frickin' time I ever do your brother a favor. His hands flew into the air, gesticulating wildly. For Pete's sake, Frank, I know you're desperate for the world to believe you didn't kill her, but that had to be the laziest, most pathetic attempt at Photoshop I've ever seen. What? None of that was photo— Hey! He barked, stomping across the foyer, crushing frozen meal boxes beneath his boot heel, squaring up to me, nose to nose, lips contorted into a snarl. I shut my mouth and sheepishly tilted my head to the floor. Distant lightning fractured the sky, bathing the room in a pearly flash. Hughes lowered his voice to a sharp whisper. How dumb do you think I am, bud? You really expect me to believe you got a motion detected notification for something that far away from the camera? You get a notification every time a sparrow flies over the cornfield too? My heart sank. I hadn't considered that. And by the way, those corn stalks are at least 7 feet tall. So next time you try to pull a stunt like this, it might be a good idea to make her shorter than the stalks, not half a head taller. I hadn't considered that either. Turns out the pure relief of seeing Rose again had blinded me, and when that blindness lifted, some unnerving irregularities began settling in my blood, like drying cement. My entire body felt numb and heavy. I stared at the floor. What the hell was on that video? Hughes slapped a hand onto my shoulder. My eyes snapped back to him. Rows of cigarette-stained teeth shone through a hollow grin. Great talk, he mumbled, releasing his palm. He trudged across the foyer and swung the front door open. The thumping clamor of a rainstorm erupted into my home. One last thing, he shouted from the doorway. Let's pretend you weren't god-awful at video tampering, and I believed what you said was on that recording. Isn't it kinda suspicious that the first thing you did was devise a way to get me over here, rather than look for Rose yourself? Hughes flipped his hood up and stepped into the downpour, leaning out of frame while holding the door open, gesturing to the cornfield. She's right there, Frank. A little rain really gonna stop you from finding your beloved? I stared at the man, searching for something to say. He sighed. Listen, judging by the rust, I'd bet good money your truck is just an expensive metal sofa at this point. So, wanna lift into town? I don't know whether or not you killed Rose, but I know that Dan cares about you, and I know this hellhole is poisoning your mind. A dormant rage reignited in my gut. I did not kill her. You vapid, miserable scumbag. Each syllable fired from my diaphragm, like a pistol shot. My rage echoed through the empty corridors, blanketing the ruins of my life in a layer of harsh, blood-red noise. That echo slowly faded. I steadied my labored breathing. Now get the hell out of my house. He chuckled, turned, and plodded into the storm. Frozen in the center of my musty, poor-lit, trash-laden foyer, I watched the door gradually sputter closed, jerking on its hinges, and for a second, my eyes latched onto something. A long-legged silhouette looming atop the weathered yellow road markings, a featureless outline glistening in the relentless downpour. Then the door clicked shut. I bolted to the room's front-facing bay windows and pressed my face into the murky glass, stomach twisting, lungs on fire. What the heck? What the heck? What the heck? I whispered, eyes darting across the road. I scanned every inch of it. Once, twice, 3 times, and all I saw was the headlights from the detective's sedan, growing dimmer and dimmer on the horizon. It took about an hour to settle my screaming nerves. I darted from window to window, peering out into the storm, frantically surveying the perimeter for whatever I thought I saw, hoping that would calm me down. The patrol backfired. My imagination projected the long-legged silhouette into every dark corner of the overwhelming gloom, elevating my panic to new heights. Autopilot took over. I paced into the foyer, brandishing a half-filled bottle of scotch that was resting on the coffee table, and began chugging. My nervous system cooled. The panic faded. I finished the last sip with a wheezing cough. I tossed the bottle into the already cluttered fireplace and stumbled into the kitchen, collapsing into the chair Hughes had been sitting in. Jackass, I muttered, staring at the closed laptop. Gusts of wind battered the house, whipping the rafters, causing the walls to creak and moan. Loose gutters crashed against the side of the roof. I wedged my fingertips under the display and slowly pulled it up. The screen flashed to life, and the footage resumed. I studied the motionless silhouette. The more I examined it, the less it looked like Rose. The arms were too skinny. The head was too long. The body appeared flat, paper-thin, almost two-dimensional. But the face was right. The button nose, the rounded chin, the fire glinting behind their eyes. My phone chattered against the table. I gasped, clutching my chest, heartbeat striking my palm. Geez. I picked it up and answered without checking the caller ID. Dan's gravelly voice buzzed through the receiver. I just got off the line with Hughes. What the frick happened, man? I clicked the spacebar. The timestamp at the top of the recording stopped ticking. Same old crap that always happens. He didn't believe me. I swear I could point out the flaming orb in the sky and call it the sun, and these people would still label me a liar. The room began to spin. I closed my eyes and rested my forehead on the keypad. Gosh, Frank, every day you sound a little more like Dad. What's that supposed to mean? A hint of regret crept into Dan's voice. You know, just nothing was ever his fault. Not the divorce, not the drinking, none of it. Hell, even some of the issues back when we actually owned the house and the farmland. I felt myself drifting from the conversation. The hypnotic thumping of rain was more significantly palatable than another one of my brother's sermons. The phone vibrated against my ear. I shot upright and peered at the screen. My guts twisted into violent knots. Motion alert, 10:32 p.m. I scrambled to switch to the live feed. Dan droned on in the background. Remember how Dad would always lose things, but he'd never own up to it? It was pathetic. The man would blame the cornfield before he blamed himself. Said the land was slippery and cracked at the seams. I furiously examined the black and white image. Stalks wavered in the bellowing wind. Lightning flickered in the background. No silhouette. No moths. No motion. There was this one time, back when you were still a baby. It was the middle of the night. I woke up because Dad was yelling, probably drunk, but he wasn't arguing with Mom. He was on the porch, screaming into the dark, howling the phrase, "Give it back," over, and over again. I rewinded the feed to exactly 10:32. Still, the cornfield was vacant. Something had set the detector off. Where the frick was it? Then I saw it, not in the cornfield, much closer to the camera, hanging over the porch awning. A bulbous, rolling pin-shaped knob with two thin, crooked, wriggling protrusions, curling over at the ends like cricket antennae. Those protrusions hooked onto the awning's edge and pushed up, quickly disappearing from the feed. Recognition came in small, venomous drips. An old nickname began rattling around my skull. Two-toed rose. Without warning, the rain became louder, less muted. Droplets clinked against the empty glass bottles, scattered around my foyer. The music of her arrival. I slid the phone into my pocket and stood with as much grace as my drunken limbs could muster, careful not to squeak the chair legs against the tile. Bouts of wind howled within the next room. I took slow, silent steps, bringing the foyer into view. Silver moonlight bathed the waterlogged couch in an eerie glow. I didn't understand, but I couldn't see the roof. I leaned forward. There was a hole, a narrow hole with smooth rounded edges. Maybe slit is a more appropriate word. It was long. From my vantage, I couldn't see how long. I leaned a little more, but stopped before I saw the end. I squinted. Motes of dust danced in the moonlight, swelling, ballooning towards me, forming shapes that caused waves of primal distress to explode across my skin. But I couldn't run, not yet. Not until two ghastly emeralds gradually shimmered into existence, getting closer and closer, and then a rounded chin and a button nose. She was right in front of me. I could only see her semi-translucent face, superimposed over the foyer. It crinkled the atmosphere as she pushed closer, like forcing a mask through a layer of saran wrap. Her expression was one of contentment, cheeks raised, with a wide, toothless smile, but it was still wooden, nearly lifeless. A wispy sensation tingled along my right palm. I think she was trying to hold my hand. I almost smiled. Rose had found a way back to me. Scorching pain engulfed my entire hand, a feeling like hundreds and hundreds of insect legs burrowing into my flesh. I leapt back, wailing in agony, terror squeezing my heart, but it was too late. I threw myself around and sprinted towards my back door. I stretched my hand out to grasp the knob, but something went wrong. I could feel my palm and my fingers, but they hadn't moved to the door with me. Somehow, they remained in the center of the kitchen. I looked down. My hand was just gone, silently stolen, severed cleanly at the wrist. A jagged layer of blackened flesh covered the wound, as if I'd pushed the stump against steaming metal until it sizzled. I felt her approaching, slinking closer with every passing second, but I couldn't stop gawking at the empty air where my hand should have been. I couldn't move. I couldn't leave. I was going to die in that miserable, God-forsaken house, just like Dad did. A spark caught fire behind my eyes. I twisted the knob with my other hand, rammed my shoulder into the door, and descended into the inky darkness. Heavy rain peppered my eyes, blurring my vision. Mud swallowed my bare heels with every step. I didn't look back. I just kept sprinting towards the truck. I felt her. She wasn't far behind. I swung the door open and launched myself into the driver's seat. My stump collided with the gear lever. Unbearable pain radiated up my arm. The syrupy warmth of leaking blood trickled across my wrist. I screamed through a tense jaw, chipping teeth. I sucked down the chalky fragments and reached under the seat, grasping for the spare key. I couldn't see her, but I knew she was only a few feet away. My fingertips finally grazed metal. I heaved the key into the ignition. The engine shuddered, then roared to life. I threw the truck into drive and slammed on the accelerator without even gripping the wheel, screeching onto the rocky asphalt, skidding in and out of potholes. After a few seconds, the car stabilized. Cornstalks passed by at 40 miles an hour. My ragged breaths began to slow. Gradually, the rain stopped. I felt Rose becoming more and more distant. For a split second, I couldn't feel her at all. There was a brief, beautiful silence. Then, like a crack of lightning, I felt her again. Not behind me, not at the farmhouse. She was approaching from in front of me. Before I could react, her paralyzed smile appeared in the headlights. She was standing on the roadside, leaning forward, her head poised to hit the front windshield. Instinctively, I ducked. Her face struck the windshield. The collision itself was noiseless. No crunching of metal, no shattering of glass. The only new sound was the whoosh of cold air blustering through the truck. Rose quickly disappeared in the rearview mirror, unmoored, seemingly no worse for wear. I creaked upright, inspecting the damage. A perfect, face-shaped hole ran the length of the truck, exactly where my head had been before I ducked. Steam drifted from the metal edges. Once again, my connection to Rose dimmed, but it didn't leave me completely. It only truly disappears when she slips through the seams. Currently, I'm holed up in a cheap motel, about 10 miles from the farmhouse. Dan keeps calling. Once I'm a little farther away, I'll pick up. I don't want to risk him being caught in the crossfire. Rose is coming for me. Seems that some part of her still wants me, a residual urge that refuses to fade, despite her grievous mutations. I'm going to do whatever I can to evade her, but for better or worse, I'm connected to her now. She has my right hand. If I focus, I almost feel like I can wiggle my fingers. I don't know exactly what happened to her. Maybe my dad was right. Maybe the land is cracked at the seams. Maybe things slip through and end up somewhere else, a different, parallel place, loosely tethered to our piece of reality. Wherever she disappeared to, it makes sense that Rose, of all people, would find a way to come back. When Rose wants something, she'll do anything in her power to make it manifest. We never had our wedding, but I think Rose and I are destined for a much deeper connection. Very, very soon. I just want to give a big thank you to the wonderful authors that let us narrate their stories. If you check out the description of this video, there are links to their profiles if you want to check out any more of their stories. I loved reading these stories, and I hope you enjoyed listening to them.